All right, so we're going to get started today. I'm going to depart from the demo just a little bit because I want to do a lecture with some slides to kind of talk about line weights and elevations in general before we get into the technical drawing of the elevations. So let me give me a second to share my screen here. And all right, let me see if we can't get this started. There we go. Okay, so I want to talk today about line weights and specifically line weights relating to elevations. And so as I go through these, we'll talk about line weights in general, but then also specifically, I'll show you a bunch of elevation examples so that we can kind of get ready. The weight of a line simply refers to the thickness or potentially the darkness, if you're drawing by hand, to which a line is rendered graphically. So I talked a lot about line weights last class. Line weights again here, same meaning. It's essentially you're giving emphasis to a particular line based on how dark it is. It has a great effect on how a drawing is shown. You can give, you can illustrate kind of a depth or a three-dimensionality. You can also showcase what's happening. So if you use a different line type, for example, it's a dashed line or a dotted line, it might mean something when we look at the overall drawing. So these kinds of, as you get better at drawing, using these line weights can make a big lines. Those are things that are visible. They're plans, section, elevation, 3D views, dimension lines, leader lines, etc. We won't talk about dimensions and leaders so much in this class, but you'll definitely encounter it later on. Dash lines are usually referencing something that's hidden, something that's behind or something that's above, that's not in the plane that we're drawing. Movement are phantom lines. I actually rarely use phantom lines for door swings. I usually just use a solid line, but again, that's a stylistic thing. Leaders and annotations, we're not going to discuss much. Break lines. These break lines are there. You've probably seen them before. They're lines that look like this. They're kind of like a heartbeat. And when you draw a line like that, it means that something goes beyond what you're drawing and continues and then picks up. Sometimes you'll see them next to each other where you'll see a pair like this. And that means we've taken out some piece in the middle so that it'll fit on the page. So we've taken out something, it's continuous, it looks the same, but we've kind of cut it out. Those are break lines. Center lines would indicate where the center of an arc is. Section lines generally denote where we're cutting through a building. And we'll see that a little bit later. When we get to the 3D part, we'll do some sections and that'll make more sense. Line weights. This is kind of an interesting slide. And I like this one a lot because it looks at both if you were drawing by hand, what the line would be like, and it also looks at what if you were working in AutoCAD, which would be the millimeters, and what if you were working in Illustrator, which would be the points of line. So we've got different setups here. Construction lines are the lightest lines. If you were drawing by hand, they'd be the 6H lead, the really hard lead that doesn't leave a lot of darkness on the page. They'd be the 0.00s to the maybe 0.1, 0.13 millimeters, or 0.18 to 0.25 point in Illustrator. Be the door swings, information lines, etc. are bumping up a little bit. Medium lines are the secondary objects, so the things that are on furniture, cabinets, those kinds of features. Boulder lines are the lines that represent the walls, for example. At 0.3 or 0.4, that's in line with the 0.4 that I told you last class for the floor plan for the walls. And then cut lines where you've actually cut through, those might even be thicker yet. So we have this scale of line weights. So why is line weights important? I think this slide is great. So we're showing this, in this example here, it's as if we're looking down right here at each of these. The drawing plane that we're taking our image from is shown right down below here. And then this is the object that we're drawing. So if we come down here to the actual drawing of it, we see that we have dark lines on the outside, there and there. And we have a much thinner line right here because the cut that we have is right on the surface. When we have a fold, this, sorry, I don't have my pencil today. So this line here is going to be thicker than the lines that go down or the lines at the bottom. So we're going to see that represented here. Thickest lines right there. Next level would be coming down, and the third level would be on that part. If we go straight down with the jump like this, we have the bold lines right there and the thinner lines there and there. And this last one is where this kind of tucks back underneath, in which case we're seeing a hidden line, the dashed line. That's the representation of the dashed line here, represents that something is folded under. So it's a good illustration of what's happening. Here's another example of the different types of lines that we might be using. The section lines are listed up top. We have a break line, phantom line, center line, dash line, etc. So let's look at some actual objects as we start to see this. So this is the same object repeated 4 times, the same number of lines. And what we visually see is totally different based on where the dark lines are and where the lighter lines are. So we can discern what's in front or what's behind based just on how dark or light a particular line is. So even though these are the same objects, different pieces come forward in the objects as we look at them. So all of this stems back to when you used to draw by hand. And so this elevation here is an elevation that was drawn by hand. It's a much more sketch form than a formal elevation, but we can see a lot about the line weights in this elevation, and that's part of why this really lives nicely in elevation view. So let's look at it. The thickest line of all of it is this big bold line that goes all the way along the bottom. And what that is representing is that's representing where the ground is. So as we take this elevation, we've gone right up close to the building and we've cut a plane. That's our drawing plane. It's nice and tight to the building. And that's representing where the ground is and then what we're seeing behind it. So the thickest line is always what we've cut through, and that's the ground, and it's represented here. The next thickest lines tend to be whatever's closest to us and also whatever outlines the overall building. So if we look here, the line that continues right here all the way up the outside of the building and around and back down right there is the next level of thickness. So if this was level 1, this one right there would be level 2. Level 3, or probably similar to level 2, is this balcony section right here, because that's sticking out toward us. So that's maybe level 3. So we talked a lot about hierarchy in their graphic design sense. Same thing's happening here where we're establishing that hierarchy. So we have a level 3. Then as we recede back, we might get level 4 in these windows and doors. So this might be level 4. Level 5 is going to start to be the finer details. So the shingles, that might be a level 5. The rocks over here, that might be a level 5. And things that are further away from us. The last level would be level 6, which are the things that are much further away. That balcony is way around the side of this building, so it's going to be the lightest of the overall lines. So we're establishing this hierarchy in the elevation so we can see what's closer to us and what's further away. So this is a much more formal elevation view. But in the same context here, we can read the depth of the building. The thickest, boldest lines are the ones right in front. So if we look at what goes up and around the sides there of this object in front, that means that this is actually the closest to us. And as we go back toward the building, the lines get a little bit lighter. So the next level might be these little pieces here on either side, then the building itself, and then ultimately this. I like this view as well because they've done something kind of creative with the trees. So the idea here is that this is in a forest. So we're seeing trees, but instead of drawing the trees such they block the whole view, like especially this tree right in the front here, they've drawn it just as these thin little silhouette lines. So there's a tree, here's another tree. work on this. We have some shadowing that's been taken into account, some little bits of shadow there. Those little bits of shadow are shown here as horizontal kind of lines. I'll show you how to do it with some just general shading a little bit later on, and certainly during the demo portion of the lecture. So let's switch from the hand-drawn over into the computer drawn. And this is usually much easier to see the line weight setup. So if we look at the line weights on this and the hierarchy, again, the things that are closest, well, first off, the ground level is always the thickest line. So that's always level 1. Level 2 would be the outline of the building, and we can see that right there. And also the things that are closest to us, like this deck that comes out toward us. Those are going to be the thickest lines. And then as we step back, things that are further away become thinner. This tower here becomes a little bit thinner. The lines that are underneath the deck become a little bit thinner. And then obviously the detail, the siding or whatever, that becomes the most thin. Right? Those are really fine details. This over on the side is a good example of setting something back with a different line weight so that it looks like it's on the side as opposed to coming forward. So if we squint our eyes at this drawing, you can really see what parts come forward toward us, what parts go away. And that's part of showing the elevation well. They've also done some work with the collage of the trees in the background here. I think this is pretty successful because they're so light. They don't take away from the building. They're just there as kind of context. So this is a little bit more technical. We've got some section cuts shown here. Those would be these lines up at the top. Those are, like I said, a little bit more technical. We've also got a bunch of dimensions and stuff on the sides. Those are nice and thin, elevations, etc., spot elevations. But the same rules apply here. The thickest lines are the ones at the ground level. And then the outline of the building and the things that are closest to us are the thickest. And we could go through and number those in the same kind of hierarchy level. Another example here, I actually think the unsuccessful part of this is the ground, the dark gray ground. I think it would look a lot nicer if that was just clean and white with a thick line as the ground line. The trees are, however, really nicely done. We have, I think part of this is just the view. I think these windows in here are actually thinner, but because there's so many lines dense together, they're showing up as thicker lines. And that's something you do need to be aware of when you start to draw detail in elevations. I doubt that you guys will get to that level, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Here's another progression that I think is interesting in that we have the line drawing at the top, and then we start to show what happens with the collage as we come down in levels. So they're using the line drawing and then they're collaging over the top of it. And this is something that I'll show you how to do. For AutoCAD, it'll be in Illustrator, but then also we'll use this same technique in Photoshop with SketchUp later on, where we'll do the collage work to kind of enhance the drawings going forward. Another example of an elevation view. Again, these are computer drawn. A few more elevations. A little bit more invested in this, a lot more roof lines and what have you to take into account in these elevations. This is being a little bit more technical. It's kind of an elevation also slash section where they're showing some more, real technical about how this is building, the cedar boards that are listed, etc. So those are, again, just a little bit more technical. Here's one that's an elevation view, but it's been colored. So we see the trees, we see the different kind of cloudy sky in the background, the windows and whatever. So sometimes this is a successful strategy. This is actually part section, part elevation. I should clarify. This here is elevation. This here. You won't be required to draw a section as part of this assignment. Here's another example here of an elevation. I think this is a good one because it's showing us what is really in front. So we can pick out that this building right here is the part that's closest to us, and that this is further away, and that that is further away. That's all done with the line weights. Similar. Okay, so these last three that I'm going to show you, this was a project that I actually designed and built in Lafayette, but I like to show these in context because I think it will make a big difference as you see the purpose of elevations. So this drawing was designed during the design review process. So when we went to show this in front of the city to get approval for the project, we wanted to show what the building looked like with color, kind of, our general idea for it. Again, drawing, the things further away are lighter. A good example there being that the siding is shown in this forward section of the building, but when we get back here, it's much lighter, so we can tell that it's further away. So this was kind of the design concept, color, general look of the building. Then we move forward into a little bit more technical drawing. So again, this was a part of that design review where we're showing a little bit more technical information. Again, the line weights are really important here. We're still showing the shadows cast by the roof lines, but a little bit more detail. And I'm talking about what the siding is going to look like, what the trim is going to look like, referencing certain details, etc. I have these elevations, the spot elevations. That's all relevant information for the design process. So we went from this last one with the color, uncolored version with some technical notations. Again, these were part of the design process. After the approval of this, when we went to actually construct the building, there's yet a third elevation. So this elevation became the construction drawing elevation. And you see that there's lots more detail references, very specific spot elevations. There's window callouts, door callouts. So there's a lot of real technical information that's included on this sheet that isn't included in any of the rest of the sheets. There are still line weights, it's still important, but they're de-emphasized a bit. So if we flip back again, you see that those line weights are bolder, darker, showing a little bit more. But when we go forward, we've de-emphasized them. They're still there, but they're not nearly as important as they were. So I think those three in context help to show this progression of line weights and how it's relevant to what we're trying to show. Okay, so we'll jump out of this. I'll leave you with this parting piece of wisdom from Tips for Architecture School. If you want to get good at drawing, get good with line weights. And it's so true. The best drawings are the ones with lots of line weights. So you want to get in the habit of drawing with line weights, make sure you're using them. There was a stigma for a long time about computer drawings because they didn't have enough line weights. They didn't look as good as hand drawings. Actually, when I was in undergrad, when I was in your shoes, they used to make us draw by hand, even though we had computers and we had AutoCAD, because we couldn't show the line weights as well. And so I used to kind of cheat the system a little bit. I'd draw it in AutoCAD and then I'd print it out and trace it with lines. So it was hand drawn with all the technical requirements, but at least I could do the design work and the drawings on the computer. So it's definitely evolved quite a bit. We now have a lot more line weights, a lot more capabilities in AutoCAD. So let's make sure that we use them. Okay, so I've shown you those slides. I'm going to go ahead and jump into our exercise for today. And our exercise for today, if I pull it up here, is that we're going to be drawing building elevations. So hopefully you used your time last week wisely, and in using that time, you have a completely finished floor plan. And now we can actually concentrate on how do we draw these elevations. So I'm going to ask you first to open your exercise 119. This is what you were working on. And we're going to start setting this up for our elevations. The first elevation that we're going to do is the south elevation, which would be this elevation of my drawing. And we're going to create that at the bottom. So here's my plan. And this was the plan that I worked on last class. And we're going to create an elevation view down here at the bottom. So first thing I need to go into my layer properties. And I want to create a layer for my south elevation. Oops. So I'll come over here. I'm going to click on the new layer button. And I'm going to do an A- And I could just do elevation, or I could do south elevation. Okay. I'm going to make that the current layer. So I'm going to start drawing on that layer by clicking on the little layer icon right here. And when I do that, oops, let me double click on it. That green check mark is going to move up. That means when I do my drawings, it's going to show up on that layer. Now, with that one selected, I'm also going to create another layer, and that layer is going to be called guides. So I call it guides. With the guides layer, I'm going to come in here and change it. So first off, let's change it to, well, I like green for non-printing layers, but you could change it to red. We just want it to be on a color that we know is not our drawing. And I'm going to click this little printer icon as well. And when I click that little printer icon, it's going to actually take this layer and print when I go to print, which is actually a really powerful tool for us to have, because when I do that, I can draw on this layer and it's not going to end up printing later on. So anything I draw just goes away. So let's start thinking about this, this drawing here. And like I said, I want to draw the elevation down here. For clarity, let's go ahead and turn off the topography layer just so that we don't get confused. I'll click on. And now when I go to draw my elevation view, I want to draw it just directly below my, we'll go right like that. I want to draw it right down here. Sometimes, for those of you that are less experienced, it's helpful to kind of identify what is the context in which we're trying to draw this elevation. And I could do that by drawing what's called a bounding box. Let me switch to my guides layer. I'll double click on it so that that's active. I'll close my, and I'm going to choose the rectangle tool. So let me click on rectangle here. And what I mean by a bounding box is I'm going to draw a box that completely contains my whole object. So this would be the lower right corner of my building. And the upper right corner of my building is a cross between this line right there and this little protrusion right here. So if I set 2 points there and I find out where they meet, there they are. This red rectangle is essentially the bounding box in my building, but it's also the planes on which I'm going to draw my elevations. So I have that set up. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in just a little bit here. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and start to drop some guidelines to help me out. And for these guidelines, I could just use regular lines, but there is a tool in AutoCAD that is kind of like a regular line, but it goes off to infinity rather than being a fixed length. And it's called a ray. And I can initiate that by typing ray, or I can use this tool right here. And that tool right there, or if I type in ray, will allow me to draw a line that goes off to infinity. So there it is. You see, no matter how far I zoom out, that line is still there. I'm going to do that from each of the corners of my building. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to repeat ray there. I'm going to right click to repeat ray from that corner. I'm going to right click to repeat the ray from this corner. So essentially what I've done is I've identified where each of the corners are in my building. Now I can do something very similar here. Instead of a ray, however, I'm going to draw what's called a construction line or an X line. And this goes off in both directions to infinity. And when I do that, I'm going to specify a point somewhere down below my drawing like that. And there is my construction line. I'm going to use that to represent the ground for right now. So now that I have those kind of set up here, let's go ahead and switch my layer. I have nothing selected. We're going to switch over to the south elevation layer. And I'm going to draw with a line where the ground would be. So I'll come over here. I'm going to draw a little bit outside. And I'll draw right over to here. And that line then represents the ground. I could select the line and come up here to my line weights, and I could increase the line weight to maybe 0.7 to represent the ground. I do have a little cheater sheet set up for you. If you click, there's the JPEG of it, but right here is a PDF. It will go ahead and open this page, and it'll tell you how thick to make certain lines. So this is designed to help you out. So the ground here is 0.7 millimeters in black. Perfect. So I went ahead and I drew that at 0.7 in, well, since we're in AutoCAD, it's in white, but you get the idea. Now, from a technical standpoint, if I come back here to my line tool, there's always a little bit of distance between the ground and the first floor. And so for our purposes, let's make that at least a foot. So I'm going to come up here by 1 foot to draw across. So if I came across here, that would be my first section of building. I could come across to the next section right there. I could come across to the last section right there. Now, with this, I also need to know kind of the general height of my building. So I would say that first floor ceiling is somewhere about 8 feet. That's what a typical ceiling is. I could do it at 9 if I wanted to, if you want a little bit taller ceiling. But let's say it's 8 feet. So I'll go up. My mouse doesn't stop on me here. Sorry, I had an issue there with the remote desktop. I can draw all the way across. That one's really more of a reference line than anything else. Then I could go ahead and I could start to draw the sides. So I could say from right there to right there. I could right click to repeat the line, draw a line from there to there. I could right click to repeat the line and draw a line from here to here. I could right click to repeat the line and I could draw a line from here to here. So I'm starting to draw those side walls. Now, I haven't actually specified this yet, but these being closer would end up being a little bit thicker. So I can either assign the line weights as I go, or I could come back and assign the line weights a little bit later on. I'm going to pause right now and not assign the line weights, and I'll come back to those in a little bit. So the next piece would be to figure out where the windows would go. And so in this building, I have some tall, skinny fixed windows, and I have some windows that I kind of envision being the whole side of the building. But again, that's for me, you know, it's a design decision. So could my guide layer. So let me switch over into the guide. And let me type ray. And I could identify where this first window would be occurring. So there's 1 point. Let me right click to repeat the ray. And there's the next point. Now, when I come down here, I want to draw where this window would be. So this window is set up to be in the kitchen. So I know that the window height needs to be at least above where the counter would be. So minimum would be 3 feet. So let's do 3'6". And that's going to be where I start my window. Oh, looks like I didn't change my layer. That's okay. We'll just keep going. And let's make the overall height of this window. I'm going to go ahead with 5 feet, because this is going to end up with a taller ceiling anyway. And then we'll come back and we'll come down here. Now, this window was the wrong layer. So if I select it, remember, if I select from left to right, I can select everything that's completely contained within my selection group. So I haven't selected the rays. And I can change that to be on the south elevation layer. Like that. I could also type in join to make that one object. So it's taken the individual lines and joined them together. And then to make this look like a window, let's add a little bit of a frame. So I could say offset, let's say 1.5 inches, and it makes a little frame like that. I could also choose to make a frame around the window. So I could do an offset again at, let's say, 3.5. And I could make a wood frame around the window. Now, that wasn't quite the design strategy that I was going for, because these windows are kind of close together. So I'm not going to end up with a big frame around these windows. So let me go ahead and erase that. I could press the delete key if I was on a PC as well. So I have that first window. Let's go ahead and select it. Now here's the advantage. I've drawn the first window. I could go ahead and I could copy it to make each of the rest of these windows. So let's go ahead and go to copy. And I can copy this to each of the rest of the windows. Like that. I'll hit enter to finish. And now I have all of those windows set up. Similarly, I could work on these windows here. So let me go ahead and do another ray. And we'll go down. Oops. So that one's on an angle. Let me make sure it's going straight down. We'll have to delete that. Let's go back to ray. That. Like that. Now, I just realized that I forgot to turn on my keystroke logger for you guys in the recording. So I apologize. Give me 1 second to turn that on before I forget. Sorry about that. Let's see. It's this one. I think it helps you see my keystrokes and what have you. So I apologize. I meant to turn that on and I forgot. Okay, so now that's on. Again, I apologize. So once again, I brought those down. And now for this window, I kind of envisioned it being more floor to ceiling. So I might draw with my line, or I could even just try it one more time. There. And we'll jump up right there. And that whole thing needs to change to be on the south elevation layer. And then I may choose to do an offset on this. So let's do offset 1.5 inches, like that. And then I also might want to divide this up into several sections. So I might come up here and draw a line across. That should have been on the south elevation layer. I keep making that mistake. Before I keep drawing, let me switch to the south elevation layer. There we go. And let me do an offset. Again, it's 1.5 inches. And there's a division. And so now I have an upper window and a lower window, for example. Once I have these, I can again copy this for each of these other windows. I go to copy. And I'll take it from right there for each of these windows, like that. So the key is that I'm drawing the window first, and then I'm copying it for each additional window. It makes life a little bit easier. Okay, so I've drawn those windows. It looks like I need a few other things because I have these little wings sticking out. They're a little stylistic recess. So let me do a guide with a ray. Comes in here right there. I'm going to right click to repeat the ray. And I'll draw it straight down there. Those are those little side walls. I keep struggling with the connection. I think it might be the rain. Too far into it. Perfect. And then I will draw a line that drops straight down. Oops, I didn't change my layer. Nothing selected. Let me switch to south elevation. And then we can go ahead and draw. Oops, yeah. That right there. And another line. That right there. So I'm just kind of working out my building. There may also come a point where you feel like you have too many rays that are set up. If you feel like there are too many rays, don't be afraid to just select them and delete them, because they're just temporary. They're guides for you. So let's think about what the roof line of this building should look like. And so I have a little bit of an unfair advantage because I've kind of designed this in my head, and I also have given you an idea of what this elevation might look like. But you have a decision to make, and that decision could be to have a flat roof. It could be to have a pitched roof. And that's going to change how you draw your overall building. If you are having a flat roof, for example, it may be something as simple as drawing, right? A flat roof. Would probably want it to be at least 12 inches thick. Something like that. You also might want this roof to extend over the sides, so you had a little bit of an overhang. So I might push it out by, a foot. But for our purposes, I actually want to draw it with a pitched roof. I think it'll look better as a cabin, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I need to decide what the angle of this roof needs to be. And generally, this is listed as a rise over run calculation. So you'll hear a 6 and 12 roof, or a 12 and 12 roof, or an 8 and 12 roof. That means for every, let's do a 6 and 12, right? For every 12 inches of run, we're going to go up 6 inches. If it's 8 inches, for every 12 inches of run, we'd go up 8 inches. If it's 12 and 12, if for every 12 inches of run, we'd be going up 12 inches. So what I tend to do to kind of set this up is I'll do a line. I'm going to start at my outer edge here. And when I create this line, I'm going to use those coordinates that we used before. I'm going to say at, for relative, 12 feet in the X, comma, 12 feet in the Y, and that's going to give me a line at 12 and 12. If I wanted that slope of the roof not to be 12 and 12, if I wanted it to be 8 and 12, for example, it would be at 12 feet, comma, 8 feet. And that's going to give me the slope at an 8 and 12, or a 6 and 12, or a 4 and 12, etc. Most of the time, it's a even number. And I'm not really sure why, but it tends to be an even number. But because this is a cabin in the mountains, I'm going to stick with the steep roof, and I'm going to go 12 and 12. So there's my 12 and 12. Now, I have this kind of roof on one side, but I'd like to figure out what happens on the other side. So I can do that by just mirroring this. So I go to mirror, and when I drew this bottom line, if I were to snap to the midpoint, which is not turned on, let me turn on midpoint snap. If I were to come down here and snap to the midpoint and go straight up and down, that would give me the other part of this roof line. Now, this point wouldn't actually occur right at 8 feet because I'd have to have some structure in there. So let's move this whole thing up by a foot. I'll type move. We'll go up by 1 foot. And there it is. I'm going to go ahead and type trim. And I'm going to get rid of these pieces that are outside. Now, I may want to have some overhangs. And if we look at the drawing that I have here, you can see that I've drawn overhangs on the side. Stylistically, maybe I don't. Maybe I want it to be, really tight to the building. On this side, let me do it tight to the building. On the other side, I'll do it with an overhang, just for fun. So let me use my fillet tool. So I'll type fillet. My radius, so I'll type R for radius, is going to be 0. and I'll fillet this to that. I'll right click again to repeat the fillet, and I'll fillet this to that. Now I need an inner thickness, so let's go ahead and do an offset, and I'll do that at 6 inches. Like that. And like that. And then I could again do the fillet to connect this to this. Repeat the fillet for that. And that. One more right click to repeat the fillet for up here at the top. And that. And I've now kind of set up that upper roof line. Let me come over to this part of the building, and I'm going to do this one a little bit differently just from a style standpoint so you can see it, but I'll create it the same way. So I'll start here at this corner. I'm going to say at 12 feet, comma, 12 feet, enter. One more enter. Back to my line tool. Now this one I could mirror it like I did before, or I could start here and do the opposite. So at negative 12 feet, comma, 12 feet, and that would draw that line. I'm going to go ahead and type trim again. There. And there. And then I'll go ahead and move this whole thing up. So let me select those. I'm going to type move. And we're going to go up by 1 foot. So I did the same thing that I did over on this side. Now this time I want there to be some overhang. So to figure out the overhang, I need to know how far I want the overhang to extend out here. So if I wanted it, say, to extend by 12 inches, I would type in 12 inches and draw a line out here. Then I can go back to my line here. I could go over by 12 inches. And I could draw another line right there. Then I can do an extend so that I could extend this line down to there and that line down to there, like that. I would then come back and erase these two lines. So I'll select erase. And then this is a similar process. So I do an offset and do a 6-inch offset for the initial. Now, from a style standpoint, you want to kind of layer up the trim, have a little bit of extra detail just to do that, or you could stick with just a 6-inch trim. If I wanted to do that, maybe I'd add another 2 inches to the trim, maybe, oops, offset 2 inches. So maybe I'd add a little bit like that, add a little bit like that. And then again, I need to do the fillet. Let me type in fillet, and we can connect those two. And right click, repeat the fillet. I could connect those two like that. And then I have to deal with the end down here. So I could choose to do a straight line. And if I did that, then I would do a fillet to connect this and that ends at a point. About this stuff in more detail, you're going to go home and look at your building and look at what the eave looks like. You're going to start paying a lot more attention to what's happening around you as you start to do these design things, because these are all important decisions. So I could draw this one, for example, straight like this. And now I have the last little detail piece here. So let me do an offset of 1.5 inches. That would be the thickness of one of these pieces of trim. Oops. Come on. Come on, Zoom. There we go. And I could do the same thing over on this side. And again, you would make these consistent. So the sides would be your look would be consistent. For my purposes, I'm kind of varying it just so you can see different options here. So now that that's done, let me go ahead and go to my fillet. And I apologize, my connection is really suffering right now. There we go. And then I'll right click to repeat the fillet. All right. And it looks like those two aren't quite meeting up. So let me right click to repeat the fillet for these two. I'll hit enter to finish, and then I'm going to choose trim. Trim. And then we get rid of that piece there. And that piece there. I'm going to zoom out here a little bit. Didn't mean to zoom out that far. And then I would trim off that piece right there as well. Now, this line, that was my 8-foot line, really is no longer relevant. So I could go ahead and erase that altogether. And that could go away. There is still a bit of the building that's in the middle here. And so at some point, I'm going to need an eave that goes across or a line that goes across. It's probably going to match up right here. Oops. You know what? I don't have perpendicular snap on. I think that's part of why I'm struggling. Turn on perpendicular snap. And there we go. And so I'd be coming straight across here. Let me repeat the line. Right click to repeat the line one more time, because there'd be one more coming across right there. Like that. Now, I don't exactly know where the upper part of this roof is because I haven't really figured that out yet. So I'd have to figure it out in one of the next elevation views. But this is starting to get really close. So let me go ahead with my line tool. And I'm going to need to draw in the foundation. And some people will just draw this straight down here to draw in that foundation. From a technical standpoint, there's usually a little bit of a reveal. So I like to move this over by at least a 1/2 inch to an inch. So I'll move it over by an inch just to have a little bit of extra detail. Let me draw that one in. And let's put this over by an inch. And we'll come down to perpendicular there as well. In this spot, I'm actually going to take this, because this is a totally different style building on this side. I'm going to take this line here. Come on. And I'm going to just extend that all the way down. And that's because of that little fin that's sticking out. And Zoom is killing me right now. It's either Zoom or my internet connection. Hopefully you guys can still hear me okay, but nobody said anything that they can't, so that's a good sign. But my connection to the remote desktop is awful. All right, that one's down there. And this one is going to go down here. And this line that represents the floor is actually going to go away in this section. So I'm going to leave it over here because that's where the siding was, but I'm going to delete it in that section. It's just a different look to the building. So you can start to see that this elevation is evolving. Okay. Now I would go back and start to assign line weights. So remember, we talked about the outermost lines being a little bit thicker. So I could select the outermost lines. I'm gonna get so slow, I can't think. There we go. You know what? Let me save this just in case we crash. Good idea. And then I would go through and I would start to select. So I might select these outer lines here. And then maybe the outermost lines there. And then I would change those up to maybe my next thickness. Remember, my ground was 0.7. So I may make these maybe 0.3. So they start to show up. So I'm going to go through and assign these line weights much like we did earlier in the class. So same thing here. I might take these because this is being seen. And I might make these also 0.35 because they're a little bit closer. And then maybe I'd take all my windows and I make them 0.00 or some combination of that. You don't have to watch me do that. Okay, so I've created that first elevation. Let's talk about the second elevation. I know I'm running short on time, but I want to show you this part of it and at least get you started on the elevation views. From here, we can actually use this part of the building as a reference for ourselves. So I'm going to again switch over to the guides layer. And from the corner of that bounding box that I originally drew, this one right here, I'm going to create a new ray. I'm going to type in ray. I'm going to pick that corner. So let me zoom in if I have to see it. I'm going to pick that corner. And I'm going to move down. And you see that by my cursor, I have a through point, but I also have a degree angle. So if I press tab on the keyboard, I can actually switch to the angle. And this angle I want to draw is -45. It's also, what is it, 325. But it's easier for me to think of it as -45. Then I'll press tab again. That will lock it at 45. You see that little padlock that showed up? And then I can go ahead and just press enter. Oops, that didn't work. I need to click, sorry, not press enter. So tab, -45, tab, and then just click. And there's my 45-degree line. This one needs to go away. Sorry about that. And there's my 45-degree line. The other option would be to do a ray, and this might actually be easier if you're struggling to create that. I could do a ray that is just straight. There it is. And then I could take this and I could rotate it. It's going to say specify base point. That'll be this corner of the bounding box. And I could say -45. And it would be on that same line. So sometimes it's easier to create it and then rotate it. Other times you might be able to do it using your key commands. So I've gone ahead and I've deleted that extra one. So this ground line here is going to correspond around the corner to the ground line on this side. So once again, I will do an X line or a construction line. I can type in X line, or I can go up to my tools and choose the X line tool. And when I do that, oops, I'm going to pick this point right here where those intersect, and then make sure I'm drawing a perfectly horizontal line. Now, if you look over here, we've got this compass in the upper corner. Above the compass, when you hover over the compass, is a shift the view to the right or to the left. And so if I hit this one, which is essentially shifting the view or rotating the view to the right, it's going to rotate the whole view for me 90 degrees. And so now I'm looking at the side of my building. See how that just switched? And I can do the same thing that I just did. Now this elevation is pretty simple. I can go in to do array. We can come straight down. I can right click to repeat. I apologize. This is keeps freezing on me. Let's try it one more time. See if I can get it straight this time. There it is. Let me hit enter. And we'll get rid of that line. So I've set up the two sides of my building, but I can also, using arrays, pull the roof line around. So there's the peak of the roof. We're going to right click to repeat the ray. That 45-degree line is kind of like when I mirrored on a 45 to reflect. I can use that to pull the heights around. I could manually figure it out. I could measure it and then do it. But I might choose instead, oops, sorry, this should have been array, to just work my way around the drawing. So there. One more. Repeat the array. All right. So now I would switch my layer to a layer, and this would be the east elevation. So I do a east elevation. Make sure it's a printing layer. Remember, layers inherit the properties of the layers above them when you create a new layer. So that's why it inherited the previous properties. Okay, let's make that active. And then I'm going to go ahead and create my lines. First line would be the ground. So I'm going to come over here, create a little bit of extra ground. Like that. That line needs to be much thicker. So I'd come up to my layer properties here and we make it 0.7. I come back to my line. I draw up the side. This represents that outer wall. There it is. We come over and back down. And then I need to do my roof. So I do my line. Oops. And I'd start there. I'd come up to my ridge. If this didn't keep jumping on me, and I'd come over, and I'd come over like that. So I'm starting to create this elevation. Now there's a little bit of this, there's no windows on this wall, which is nice, but there are these little overhangs. So I really need some dotted lines to represent those overhangs. So let me do a ray. I'll switch to the guides layer. I'll type ray. And we come down there. Let me do another one. All right, and as we discussed, we'd switch my layer back to the east elevation. You could just have one elevation layer, that would be fine. And then I'd come up from here to here, and that would be a hidden line. So I would take this line and change the line type, so below it here, to be a hidden line. Oh, it's not loaded, so I'd have to load it. I'd click here, I'd go to other, I'll click load, and let's do hidden 2. There it is. And now we could load it as the hidden 2 line. So I go right to here, and I choose hidden 2. So I know that I'm out of time for our lecture for today. I will pick up and do a little bit more on the elevations probably next class. I want you to get as far as you can on this exercise. So ultimately for the assignment, you're going to need all 4 elevations. For our purposes, today, certainly we can do 1 or 2 elevations, but I'd like you to keep kind of sorting out how many, where those elevations belong, and however many you can get done is better. So I want you to start working on this. We will have our check-ins this week. So as per our normals, we're going to go back to check-ins this week. If you're struggling with the elevations, we can talk about that. If not, I just want to kind of check in and make sure everything's going okay, you're understanding AutoCAD, etc. So it's not meant to be a particularly long check-in this week, but I do want to make sure that we get you there and that everything's proceeding forward the way it's supposed to be. I know that some of you have individual questions. You sent me some messages. We'll talk about those obviously during the check-ins as well. So at this point, I'll let you go. If you have any questions for the group, you're more than welcome to ask them now. Otherwise, I'll see you in your individual check-ins.